Our scripture this morning is found in Matthew chapter 4, starting at verse 18. Matthew chapter 4 and verse 18. Matthew chapter 4 and verse 18. Jesus calls the first disciples. While walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. And he called them. Immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. Amen. It was Mark Twain who said that the only person who likes change is a wet baby. That's probably mostly true, isn't it? We don't really like change a whole lot. I think we maybe are starting to get used to change around us. We are getting used to technology at least changing faster than we can imagine. I mean, I used to have a cell phone. Now I have an MP3 player, book reader, web browser, camera, video camera, game console, shopping helper, and oh yeah, it's still a phone, right? Like we're just getting used to more and more features in this life. We're used to instant gratification, and we're getting used to the idea that things change a lot. I mean, think about what's changed in the last 10 years. Have you noticed how many things have changed? For example, 10 years ago, you were allowed to bring bottles and shoes through security onto an airplane. Right? It's not that long ago. 10 years ago, we'd never heard of blogging. 10 years ago, most people still used a camera with something called film in it. The other day, I was with a friend who took a camera film into the superstore to get it developed, and they said, it'll take at least a week or two. And it used to be instant. 10 years ago, we'd never heard of Crocs. That was probably a good thing. 10 years ago, we'd never heard of DVRing. We'd never heard of Facebook. We never thought about being green 10 years ago. We never would have dreamed of Googling something. Most of us nowadays don't know how to find anything without it. We now have GPS, iPods, Netflix, Twitter, Wikipedia, and even YouTube, all in the last 10 years. Talk about a lot of change. Whether we like it or not, the world is constantly changing, and we need to understand that. I mean, 10 years ago, we were excited when we got our first email. Now we're excited when we get one piece of real mail, right? That's how much things have changed. It means that we need to make choices about what we'll do with our lives. Things are changing so fast. The opportunities are greater than ever. Nowadays, the research tells us that the average young person, for you that are under 40, I can't even say that anymore, but for those of you that are under 40, they tell us that you will have between 14 and 18 different jobs by the time you're 40. Think about that, different jobs. I mean, it used to be people graduated high school, got a job, and worked till they retired. Think about how much things have changed. With greater opportunities, however, we have greater responsibility to choose wisely. And I think there's a lot of times nowadays, in spite of all this change, in spite of all this busyness, that we find ourselves in a rut. Anybody here ever find yourself in a rut? Kind of stuck doing the same old, same old. Somebody says, "How you doing?" You say, same old, right? I call my family in Ontario and I say, "What's new?" And you know what? There's never anything new. It's really quite scary, actually, because when I think about it, I can say, well, this is new, and this is new, and this is new. But honestly, when you ask the question, most people say, nothing, right? We get stuck in a rut. We get in a world full of change. Somehow we still get stuck in this place where it's the same thing every day, our same routine every day, where nothing much ever changes, and where, frankly, we're flat out bored with our lives. And I believe God is inviting us to something way more exciting than that. That God, the church, that Jesus, that religion itself should never be boring, but in fact are the keys to opening the door to a full and meaningful life. A life worth living, a life that's free, a life that makes a difference in the lives of others. There was a lady named Catherine Booth. She was the co-founder of the Salvation Army Church. Her and her husband co-founded that church. And she said this, "There is no improving the future without disturbing the present." Listen to that. There is no improving the future without disturbing the present. We want, as it were, our cake and to eat it too, don't we? We want to keep everything the same and yet add on the good stuff, and then we wonder why our lives are so busy and so boring at the same time. And we have an opportunity to leave that boredom behind, to break free of the ruts of our lives. And I want to look at this story in Matthew chapter 4 again this morning, and I want you to see not only the story, but also the opportunity and the chaotic lives that Jesus' followers live as a result of saying yes when he invites them to follow him. It's a simple story. We know that God has been choosing people throughout history, but listen to it again. While walking by the Sea of Galilee, that's Jesus, he sees two brothers, Simon and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. I mean, just imagine Francis, sitting in his boat and Jesus walking by, right? Ready to fish. And Jesus walking by and saying, "Hey, come and follow me." And Francis saying, "Yeah, no problem, fish aren't biting anyway." Right? No, these guys are not fishing for fun. Okay? They're fishing for their work. And it's hard, grueling work. It's often boring. There's many times when they cast their nets over and over and over and catch nothing. And that means they don't eat or they can't feed their family. This is serious business. Jesus comes along and finds them casting their nets into the sea, and he says to them, "Follow me, and I will make you from fishermen to fishers of men." Now, I thought that was a great illustration, Jackie, the idea of Facebook and following. Twitter. How many people, when Jesus says, "Follow me," their first response is, "Yeah, good idea," but they don't actually want to leave anything behind. They don't actually want to change anything in their lives. They want to keep what they've got and just add Jesus, just like adding another piece onto the puzzle, just like somebody who's already got a job getting another part-time job. They get busier, but they don't actually change anything fundamentally. Jesus' followers, when they responded to him and said yes, it says immediately they left their nets and followed him. They understood that the story means that you have to make a choice. That you cannot keep doing what you've always done. And it's interesting, though, because when I back up for a second and say, why did Jesus pick these guys? God has been picking interesting people throughout history, hasn't he? Does God pick perfect people or imperfect people? Imperfect people, right? In fact, I went searching through Scripture looking for somebody perfect, and I couldn't find any except Jesus. I mean, God, let's go back to the Old Testament. God starts and he picks Moses. What was Moses' problem? Was he perfect? He says, "I want you to lead my people and go speak to Pharaoh." And Moses' response, "Lord, I stutter." Right? Not the obvious choice for a public speaking position. Right? He picks Moses. Then later on, what happens? He sends Samuel to find a new king. And Samuel goes through all these good-looking older brothers and finally gets to little boy David. And says, that's going to be the new king. I mean, think about it. He picks a king that's probably about 10 years old at most. I mean, David's too young. Then later on, or earlier rather, go further even back in the Scriptures to Abraham. And God picks Abraham to start his nation. He picks a guy that's 100 to start something huge. How about Jonah, the prophet who ran away? Or Noah, the faithful one. Noah was so faithful. Out of all the people in the world, that's who God saved. Noah and his 3 sons. And yet as soon as the flood was over, as soon as Noah had the chance to get off the boat, what did he do? He got drunk. Not exactly perfect, huh? Timothy in the New Testament, a pastor, had ulcers. He worried too much, apparently. Rahab in the Old Testament was a prostitute. Gideon, leader of God's people, and yet he doubted God. Elijah got burned out. Martha worried. Peter bragged, and don't even get me started on John the Baptist. I mean, that guy ate locusts for food. I mean, we're not talking sushi or something, normal, right? God picks imperfect people. And it's interesting that Jesus does this, that he continues the pattern. Because in Jesus' day, the rabbis, there was many teachers, and they were known as rabbis, would teach what they taught, and they'd be a lot like university professors now, that people would apply to them. I'd like to study under you. I'd like to learn from you. And so they would go live with them and be with them and learn from them so that they themselves could become rabbis, teachers, right? Scholars. That was the goal. But what normally did not happen in Jesus' day was that the rabbis never went looking for students. Okay? Students always came to the rabbi. And so Jesus flips that whole thing on his head, and he starts picking people to be his followers. And yet he doesn't set them up to be teachers. He sets them up to be disciples, who are people that teach others about the teacher. Jesus redefines what discipleship is. He chooses the imperfect. I mean, how many of us have gone to one of those secondhand stores and bought something that's a little bit flawed, but we thought, hey, it's a good deal, right? You know? And yet, how many of us at the same time have, when we got to know somebody, said, oh, they're okay, but they got this problem. They got this bad habit, or maybe if you remember, some of us remember far back when we were dating, remember how there was that really cute girl, but her laugh made you crazy, or, that good-looking guy, but, he had this irritating habit, right? When it comes to people, we're far more choosy, and yet Jesus picks the imperfect, the flawed, and invites them to something incredible. Instead of trying to catch fish, he invites them to catch people. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to pick on Francis again because you're a fisherman. I know that. Francis, do you think it's easier to catch fish or people? Yeah, right. Just making sure, because I'm not a fisherman. I've asked them to take me out a few times. I keep trying to find somebody that will teach this city boy how to fish, and I haven't found somebody yet that'll do that. But clearly it's easier to catch fish than people. I mean, for starters, fish are a little more predictable, right? Not that they're predictable, but they're more predictable than people. And so Jesus invites them to this challenging task. He picks the imperfect and asks more of the imperfect than we would of the perfect. Do you notice that? This is the story that we find ourselves in. And what's the opportunity then that comes out of it? Don't imagine for 1 second. We know who Peter and Andrew and James and John are. We've heard the stories. We've read the book of Acts. And later on, we've read some of, 1st and 2nd Peter, read his letters. And so we know what these guys end up doing, right? But the day that Jesus calls them to follow him, do you suppose in their wildest dreams, these 4 fishermen ever thought, this is so exciting. From now on, I'm going to be a teacher and a preacher, and I'm going to even do miracles. Not a chance. They didn't have a clue what Jesus had in store for them. They had no idea what God was going to do with their lives. And friends, that's okay, because that's how we all start. We don't have any idea when God calls us where we're going to end up. I can tell you this is true. But someday, we will have, when we follow Jesus, the opportunity to change things, to have an adventure. Becoming a follower of Jesus is not that hard. The book of Romans tells us how to do it. If you believe in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead and confess with your mouth that he is Lord, you will be saved. Saved for what? To something amazing. To freedom. I don't know about you, but I was raised with a lot of rules. And it wasn't so much at home, but in the church there were a lot of rules. I mean, there was rules about what you could do, and there was rules about what you couldn't do, and then there was the unspoken rules that everybody knew, don't do that, but nobody ever talked about it, right? You're going, yeah, I can remember some of those. Jesus made it much, much easier than that. Do you remember what he told them the rules were? He said there's only 2 rules. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then he goes on to say this, all the law and all the prophets are summed up in this. So you want to know what the opportunity is when you say yes to following Jesus. It's to be free and have only 2 guidelines, 2 rules, 2 directions that you have to go. Is test and measure every decision you're going to make by these 2 things. Is this a way to love God, and is it a way to love my neighbor? If it's loving towards God and my neighbor, it's okay. I mean, that's really simple. You know what? A 5-year-old can figure out whether it's nice or not, right? Whether that's an act of love or it's mean or cruel. Can't they? Jesus makes it easy for us to be free and so that we can make a difference. Matthew 28, the only instruction he gave us as far as what to do, living out those rules, was he said, go and make disciples, baptize them, and teach them to obey everything I've commanded you. And I'll be with you to the very end of the age. We have this opportunity as we're going. And that would be a better way to translate Matthew 28. When you read that instruction, go and make disciples. Really, if you translate it from the original language, it's closer to as you're going, as you're living your life, as you're going to work or going to school or going and teaching your family or doing whatever you're doing, going grocery shopping. As you're doing those things, share what you've got. Love God, love your neighbor, the knowledge of Jesus Christ. It's not complicated. It's not supposed to be complicated. It's an opportunity to truly be free and to invite others to that freedom, to teach them and empower them to do the same. So what do I mean by chaos? I mean, that's the title of the message after all, chaotic. It's a recognition of reality. That if Jesus asks you to follow him and you say yes, you're embarking on the adventure of a lifetime, something that's absolutely not predictable. It's absolutely not safe. I always like C.S. Lewis in the book The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. There's a character named Lucy who asks the question about the lion. The lion is Jesus in the story, if you read it. And she asks the question, is it safe? And the response she gets is so wonderful, it's so interesting, because the response you get is, no, he's good, but he's not safe. I mean, ask the disciples if following Jesus was safe. Out of the 12 he chose, one betrayed him and the other 11, 10 of them died because they followed him, and one was banished. Ask them if it was safe, if their life was calm and cool and peaceful. No, it was chaotic, and it was exciting, and it was never, ever boring. It was an adventure. Ask my wife and I if following Jesus is boring. 10 years ago, when God kicked us in the teeth, as it were, and said, I want you to sell everything you have and move to New Brunswick and train to be a pastor. And I can tell you, it did not create peace and warm, fuzzy feelings with my family, because my family, all they saw is we were taking the grandkids away. Some of you grandparents, you know what they're talking about. All I know is it took us from a place of stability and security financially and otherwise to a place where we had every day, every moment to depend on God to provide for our very food and place to live. It was chaotic and never boring. I mean, the last couple of weeks, what have we heard? We heard Jamie Hall 2 weeks ago talk about his adventure and his journey, how his family's now making an even bigger step, and they've sold their home and they're doing all these amazing things for God. And I'll tell you what, they're never bored. There's not one moment that Jamie, when you ask him, how you doing, he's going to say, oh man, I'm stuck in a rut. He's experiencing the adventure, the chaos that goes with following God, and he's embraced it. Because he gets to make a difference. How about Teen Challenge last week? And you think about those people that are daring to invest in the lives of drug addicts and alcohol addiction and mental illness, and they're saying, you know what, we're going to go risk everything to go pour into these kids' lives. I know my friend Bill Parks is never bored. You have an opportunity, my friends, to respond. I mean, even our two churches working together, it's not boring, folks. It's interesting and challenging and at times chaotic. It's certainly not boring. I dare you to look at the over 200 million Christians on this planet who are currently being persecuted for their faith, and to try and tell them that Christianity is safe. There are over 60 countries in this world where to be a Christian is against the law. Where every time they speak of their faith, every time they meet together, they are literally risking their lives. Friends, following Jesus is not something safe. It's the adventure of a lifetime, and it is chaotic. How about the story this week? How many of you heard about this young man in Nova Scotia who was suspended for wearing a Jesus t-shirt? Did you hear about that? Okay? I mean, a simple t-shirt. He's wearing a shirt that says, life is wasted without Jesus. He's not hitting people with a Bible. over the head. He's simply, in a visible way, manifesting that he has a faith in Jesus Christ. And as a result, he first faced a 12-day suspension, and then another in school, and then another 11-day suspension out of school. And they were talking about suspending him for the rest of the year, that he would lose the opportunity to graduate grade 12. That's just this past week in Nova Scotia. Don't tell me following Jesus is safe. It's chaotic. It's going to cost you something, but it's worth it. That young man and his family have put Jesus on the national stage because he refused to take off a t-shirt. Don't tell me it has to be something big. Sometimes it's just something small that you say, no, I stand here with Jesus Christ, and I will not be moved. That's a teenager. And yet most of us are unwilling to risk anything, let alone our jobs, like these four that Jesus called, who left behind everything to follow him. Friends, the definition of insanity, according to Albert Einstein, reputably a smart guy, is this. He said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I don't want to be crazy, but I'd love an adventure. How about you? He also said that anyone who's never made a mistake has never tried anything new. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to get out there and say, I think this is what God's calling me to do, and try and get on the adventure. I was sharing with somebody just last night. Following God is more like surfing than anything else, because you just got to wait for the right wave and then try and catch it. And sometimes you're going to fall off. Sometimes you're going to get tumbled. Sometimes you're going to have a heck of a ride. But it's always worth being out there and trying to be part of what God's doing. Life is supposed to be messy. It's supposed to be chaotic. It's not supposed to be boring and predictable. And how much more so should life with God through Jesus be this way? If God is leading you, if you're doing what he's called you to do, it's going to be messy and chaotic. Because Jesus didn't promise us safety. Nowhere did he say to these four men, he didn't come up to them and say, by the way, here's your health plan, and here's your retirement plan, and here's my assurance that you're going to have a great life and never have to worry about a thing. He didn't say that, did he? He simply said, follow me. And he invites us to do the same. Yes, it'll be chaotic, but getting out of the rut is actually quite simple. When he calls you to follow him, say yes, and then do it. Really follow him. When God sent Jesus to the cross for you, that was his answer. Yes. What will your answer be today? Would you pray with me?